I'm Tycho, this is Urdok, and these are fighting words. Tonight we're going to be talking about what your Larp weapon says about you. We've got a list, and we've got some thoughts, and we're going to put those two things together and see if we can get a full episode out of it. I'm quite certain we can do that.
I'm positive we'll get a full episode out of this. How many friends we have? How many friends we have when the episode is done? Might
That's
be
that's
might
different.
be a different question. Um, because this is what we think your weapons choice says about you. We're not claiming any broader truth. This is just what two salty, long-term battle gamers who dabble in RP think when they see a certain type of weapon on the field. And we're going to be talking about in battle game context and in campaign LARP context because it's different, and especially with battle games, we're talking either some sort of melee, either a skirmish or a line fight, not one on one, because one on one changes a whole bunch of the perceptions.
And honestly, outside of a fancy dress tournament context, like our background today, which was taken by Siren at the first, I believe, or second. Was this? This was the first pass of the Crown Bear.
I can't see the picture, so I have no
Oh,
idea.
it's you with your two-handed axe, me holding the bear banner, Ben with the serpent banner.
Oh yeah, that was the first one.
That's what I thought. Yeah. So from the first pass of the Crown Bear, that's kind of the only time we do all that much 1v1 fighting in battle games. Neither one of us spends much time in tournaments outside of like special side shows like the Iron Cup or someone putting on a head boop tourney.
Yeah, we're down for the weird shit, but I can't remember when the last time I was in a standard tournament was.
The only standard tournaments I think I've ever fought in is I've fought in a few dagger tournaments, and then one. So at my first Ragnarok, I was in a four-man tourney, and then in uh, I don't remember which Ragnarok it was, but I joined Drunken Bob, and I don't even remember who our third was. He's like, "Hey, Tycho, come with me. I have a rapier for you to borrow. We're gonna do the three-man tourney," and we didn't do that well because I only knew one guy on my team, and goodness, as hard as I think right now, I don't remember the third guy because it was just another rando that Drunken Bob pulled out of nowhere. But he had a quarterstaff, I had a rapier, and he wanted to see what that would do. It lost. That's what that would do.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, oftentimes the answer is no.
But speaking of rapiers, the first thing we have on our list is single sword.
Yeah, so I divided this into two categories: arming sword and longsword, because there's a difference. But generally speaking, if I see you with a single sword, well, if you're in a battle game, my the first thing I thought is, well, this is all they can afford. To be
Yeah.
honest.
Yep.
um,
Honestly, same for two stick in battle games because I know back when I ran a unit when I was in college, some flavor of two stick was almost universal because we didn't have the tools to make shields and we didn't have the money for shields. So everyone just made like two of whatever weapon they could slap together out of PVC and the right amount of tape and well, less tape, more DAP, but we would feed the DAP goblin and then just roll out into the field with whatever that gave us because shields cost money and require tools and we didn't have either. So
yeah, yeah, there is definitely a two weapon contingent that is there because that is what they have access to. And it's very easy to even just bring in a practice bin and get two reasonably shaped, reasonably sized weapons. But specifically single stick, if you have a single sword, and there's not something about you that screams, I am doing a gimmick right now," like you know, if you're in the latest stick jock fashion, and you have a single sword. So if you've got your MMA gloves and your eye protection.
if your tunic has an applique on it and your lax gloves are popping,
Oh no, 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 no. The vision in my head doesn't have a shirt.
oh, okay,
They
that
they they're
guy.
just
I
they're
fought
just
that
wearing
guy.
they're wearing some sweatpants. And probably a ring belt with a belt flag. or it might be like a punk rock belt, maybe like one of the pyramid spiked ones. Um, but yeah, if you're that guy, I know you're doing this because you're trying to prove to somebody that you can do something. You're counting coup. Um,
'Cause once upon a time, you shook hands with Peter the Quick, and somehow his greatness rubbed off on you.
so yeah, so there is a possibility based on how you're dressed that my perception is going to be you're counting coup, in which case I'm going to probably go out of my way to ruin your day as best I can. And usually because I have a pike and I'm fighting someone with a single stick, it's not that hard. But yeah, so yeah, that's usually. But anyway, that aside, my general first thought, if you're in a battle game with a single sword, is to ask myself, a single arming sword, that is to ask myself, why the hell don't you have something more useful in your other hand?
Like almost anything. Well,
Literally, a rock,
yeah,
like
there's
like like a ball of socks that you put some fabric on. Like that's more useful.
as much as I value the live hand from a martial arts and a dagger perspective, I don't ordinarily go onto the field with a live hand because the odds of me getting close enough for it to be useful are really low. It's just not likely that I'm going to need to, redirect your arm in a shield wall.
Yeah, yeah, and it's just like, I mean, unless the person, like, if they have cauliflower ears, I might be worried about them being good enough at grappling. Like if they're obviously a wrestler or were a wrestler, like if it's Garcia and he just has an open hand, I'm not going to trust him. Or Pablo.
Or
If
Heiner.
Pablo Heiner would never do it.
That's true. If somehow some paragon of the greatsword had managed to remove him from his shield, you still wouldn't want to do it.
Oh yeah, no, no. Happy, though
Definitely
Happy
happy.
might not be fast enough. Pablo Pablo Heiner and Garcia are all way faster than Happy is.
Yes.
If Happy can close the distance, he'll make it suck. But I don't think he can do that before I can move in.
And we carry sidearms, which helps.
um, but yeah, so unless you're unless you're a serious grappler with a single sword in a battle game, or you are very clearly playing some form of counting coup, my impression of you is, well, why don't you have something more useful? And usually my thought is, well, it's because you probably can't afford it because you're a college kid and you live on like 50 cents a week. Um, and this is the PVC you could beg, borrow, and steal. Um, actually, I'll be honest. If I see you in a campaign LARP with a single arming sword, I kind of like that. I will say that is a characterful thing to do. I think it's perfectly reasonable for an adventurer, or a townsfolk come questy guy.
And it's
Questy
also,
guy.
yeah, I think it's also a lot more common in that character-driven context too. Because if you think about like popular heroic characters, how many of them use a shield? I mean, Link, uh, I guess Boromir, but that's the guy who gets shot in the first movie because he's played by Sean Bean, which was either a wonderful or a terrible casting choice, depending on if you knew how the story was supposed to turn out. But for the
um,
most part, like the idol characters, like the big heroes, they use a sword.
you know what? I will say I loved Prince Caspian because he actually used a sword for that duel, a sword and shield for that duel.
Yes, well, that was also again based on something where it was very specifically delineated in the book that was part of the duel. Um,
I never read
oh, okay.
I never read Beyond the Lion and Witch in the Wardrobe, but I just thought. I mean, let's be real. It's a book adaptation, so
Right.
you know,
Yeah, I mean
so
they don't
they
always stay that
they'd
close, but
chew
that
in whatever the hell they wanted to chew in.
right, but that was an instance of them following the book pretty closely. Because the fact that Peter is using a shield is a major point in the book. Because I'm trying to recall. It's been years since I read it, but it's either that he isn't used to it or that, like in the movie, Miraz is just bigger and older, and so manages to kind of like beat the shield down, and kind of try to get at him that way. But the shield does like it's plot relevant in that case.
Is it? I was gonna say I'm actually kind of surprised that it's not some sort of theological reference that C.S. Lewis shoehorned in there.
It may also have been, like I said, it's been a few years.
It is C.S. Lewis, so it's probably something cut and pasted from Roman Catholicism. Just
I'm not
saying.
certain that the shield hadn't previously been anointed by something lion shaped.
Lying Jesus.
Yeah, but for the most part, I mean that example aside, which was a standout example, we, you do mostly see like Aragorn is kind of the
Everyone in the 13th Warrior, where they all should have fucking shields.
right. They should all have shields, and nobody does.
Yeah,
King Arthur, I don't think any of the knights from King Arthur used shields.
none of them did. Not a
No.
one.
There were a couple
Uh,
of two stick guys in that movie.
there are a
A
lot of
few
2-6 guys.
a few bow
Yeah,
guys. One guy who just had a pair of ice skates on his fists, which he punched people with, which was actually kind of cool.
yeah, I like that guy.
But for the most part, it was
It was 2-stick, and I think one guy had a two-handed axe, and I think he got shot with arrows as he broke the ice on that lake.
well, actually no. That the guy with the two-handed axe, that wasn't his weapon. That two-handed axe was basically the equivalent of a breaching shotgun. He only pulled it out when he needed to break something. We never saw him fight a person with it.
Oh,
When he fought people in the beginning of the movie, he jumped off his horse and tackled someone into the lake with a longsword. He pulled the axe out when they needed to break open a house, and he pulled the axe open when he needed to break open a lake.
oh, well, okay, so yeah, so it is a trope. um,
Right. It's a very
now that
characterful trope. Now that
now,
we've gone
now
down
we've
that
wasted
rabbit hole.
8 minutes on a sidetrack. Yeah, it is a trope that heroes don't use shields. Honestly, like even beyond that, beyond it being a trope, like like I know in Malleus, it was just useful to be able to hold a torch, so you can get some light. If your game plays with varying levels of light, you have to like being able to hold and manipulate shit in a campaign LARP is super fucking important. And like just from a practical perspective, like hauling a shield with you everywhere you go is irritating. It should not be something a character who isn't a professional soldier does because it's fucking irritating. Like I have walked around campsites for, you know, 18 hours with a 40 inch by 24-inch plank strapped or held in my hand, and it sucks.
Well, and that's with our shields generally being strapped to our liking in such a manner that they can be slung out of the way or carried comfortably. A lot of off-the-shelf LARP shields, I don't think have that option.
I'm talking about my Durok shield,
I mean, which is
which
still massive.
it's a center grip, and that's the only handle I have on it.
So
So
that one you can't sling.
no, it just sucks.
Yeah.
um, just contributes to my deformity. Increasingly asymmetrical. So yeah, so like I think a single arming sword in a LARP is actually really reasonable for most characters.
Especially
Um,
since a lot of campaign LARPs aren't as instantly fatal. So the shield isn't as much of a necessity for your continued survival as it is in a battle game where one arrow will end your life.
yeah,
Um,
that's also true too.
you've got a bit more leeway in that sense where you if you just want to not be super try hard and aren't worried about you're probably going to take a spear shot or maybe get clipped in the ankle a time or two, like that's okay. You probably shrug that off, role play limping a bit, maybe grunt or something, but I mean the shield isn't the life or death calculation that it is in a battle game.
That's also true. That's also true. It's and in some games, depending on your game, it might actually be a detriment if you're playing a spacket game and then
Mm.
you're just holding a big ass target.
I could either turn sideways and become basically invulnerable to magic, or I could carry a 32-inch round target for them to just light me up with.
Yeah, so like in a campaign LARP, I think it's a reasonable choice, and it just makes sense from a practical perspective. If you're thinking I am playing a person in a universe and not I am playing a superhero character, um, like I was saying, carrying around a shield is a pain in the ass. Carrying around a Fizzrep shield is a pain in the ass. Carrying around an actual shield is more of a pain in the ass. I would. I was going to say, if you really wanted to go historical with it, and what would a civilian carry as their personal defense items? More people should have bucklers strapped to their belts, but I think that's a little bit esoteric for a lot of people.
It is. I know I've definitely had conversations with people where they wonder what the point of a buckler is because it's just so small. The other issue with a buckler is that in a campaign LARP, you can't really do some of the aggressive plays that make a buckler really shine. Um, I mean,
No, it's an edge if you're in a fight with someone else with a single sword and you have an arming sword and a buckler and they just have an arming sword. It's an edge.
oh yeah, yeah, basically a license to punch block.
I mean,
Um,
the problem is you have to bucklers are not intuitive.
no, they take a certain mindset and a good bit of practice.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's probably if we're realistic about it, the fact that you need to train with it regularly to be useful, so for it to be useful to you, probably kind of limits it. Now, I will say, moving on to the next topic, I actually think longsword campaign LARP characters carrying a longsword, and when I'm saying longsword versus arming sword, I'm drawing the line right about 36 inches. 36, 38 inches about as long as I consider an arming sword. Anything beyond that is a long sword, or a bastard sword, or a hand and a half sword, or whatever.
That whatever cultural specific term,
Yeah, you're looking at a weapon,
claymore, Biedenhander, Nodachi.
somewhere above 3 feet, but somewhere shorter than 4.5 feet. Um, and they're common as dirt. You want to talk about a protagonist weapon? The
That
longsword
is
is the protagonist weapon. But at the same time, given the rules most campaign games play in, it makes great sense. You can, especially with a LARP version, you can effectively, wield one handed. If you're of reasonable size, like I think people shorter than 5'7" ish might have trouble with the leverage on something that's 48 inches long. And they might have trouble, getting it in motion just because of the leverage issues.
mhm.
But I think for anyone taller than that, it's not going to be much of a problem. So,
Well,
if go
and
ahead.
even if you encounter some minor issues with the leverage, you can always get it moving with both hands and throw casting shots. I mean,
Oh,
those work great for limb snipes.
oh yeah, yeah. I mean, if you can use it with two hands, you should be using it with two hands. I'm just thinking, it preserves that utility, that ability to do a thing with the other hand, to carry a MacGuffin, to carry a torch.
To open a cabin door.
Yeah, have a potion, have a potion in hand, whatever you need to do. It's still a it's still a viable combat system, to use it one handed, even though two handed is way better.
Which also makes it a good spell sword weapon for Spacket games, because you can, I mean, as long as you've got a decent pouch for your munitions, I guess, you can still defend yourself pretty well with like a 40-inch sword,
Oh yeah.
and still have that other hand free to grab and throw your little bean bags of joy.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I will say, longswords look cool.
Oh,
Yes,
yeah,
longsword aesthetic is a thing.
there's a reason it's such an enduring trope.
Uh,
It's a solid aesthetic.
it's a great aesthetic. The lines are just phenomenal, and the way they make you look in profile is just really fucking awesome. So yeah, so
I mean, one year Kendra and I spent our entire recovery day after the Firebird battle just watching a video about the geometry of swords, and it was great.
So yeah, so if you're doing a LARP and you're carrying a longsword, it's like, yeah, got a good on you. It's a versatile thing. And honestly, I believe literally any character carrying a longsword, unless you're like the dirtiest dirt peasant, like I would buy it. Like it could be a soldier's weapon, it could be a civilian weapon, it could be anything in between. As long as your character isn't like I am literally wearing a sack, like I'd buy it as a weapon.
And there's also, if just from a purely logistical standpoint, everybody sells them
Oh yeah, oh my god, yeah, yeah,
in all sorts of styles.
yeah, it's the most well represented weapons form or weapon style. So now in battle games, depends on where you line up. Honest, that's my honest answer.
I've fought
Um,
with 49-inch swords in battle games. Uh, I like the 60s better.
um, you know what? If you're gonna line up as a skirmisher, as explicitly a skirmisher, it's a personal choice whether you like the 49s or the 60s. I'd go for the 60s, but you know what? The difference is the 49s make you better against other skirmishers, and the
Hmm.
60s the 60s are a better utility weapon. So once you get in and actually start doing your job, that 60 inches is useful because that's an extra foot to chew up people's backs. But the 49s are probably a better duelist tool, so they're better on the punch through.
They tend to be more popular in tournaments, I think, for the same reason.
Oh yeah, well, because it's a duelist weapon.
Right.
Um,
It's what it's meant to do.
yeah, and the thing is, skirmishing has a strong duelist component in it. So if you're going to use it to skirmish and duel, you know, eh, and it still does the job. In most battle games, it will still be a one shot kill, even in armor. In fact, I don't. Darkon, the only one that's not a one shot kill is Darkon.
Right.
Um,
And that depends on the armor in question too.
I'm imagining the highest tier of armor.
Okay.
Um,
So basically, what Ray and I are wearing in the background picture.
yeah. um, so yeah, so as long as you're skirmished, I'm like, okay, cool. Um, I prefer sword and shield skirmishers because I prefer sword and shield almost as a doctrine. I just think the survivability of having a passive defense is so valuable in a battle game situation, and the utility of a shield person is so high that I will, if I have a choice, I'm going to pick sword and shield in almost every situation.
The
Uh,
extra foot or foot and a half of reach really doesn't override the passive benefit of a shield.
no, no, it doesn't. It doesn't. But you know, from if the perspective is I am a skirmisher, especially if you're playing Hearthlight and you're in metal armor, so you can eat that first missile shot and it doesn't kill you, then yeah, it's fine. It's the difference between that and a sword and shield skirmisher is negligible. Um,
Like I made good use of mine at Leeds, but that's because I'm very good at positioning. I mean, in terms of using the woods to get somewhere where I'm not supposed to be, and then capitalizing on that with it.
yeah, and
Um, I
that's
could have also done
positioning.
that with a sword and shield. Like
Yeah,
most of what I did, I could have easily replicated with a sword and shield. I just felt like using a longsword that day, but it didn't make me all that much better at doing what I was there to do.
but it also didn't make you all that much worse at it.
No, it was about a draw.
Yeah,
Um,
it's a wash. That's what I'm saying.
because I was able to put myself in positions where having a shield or not having a shield wouldn't have mattered.
Yeah. And if you're a skirmisher, that's what you should be doing anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so and so yeah, so as long as you're lined up with the skirmishers, you're okay with me. You're doing something useful on the field. I'm not. I don't have an issue with you. If you step on the line, I hate you, or I'm gonna just I'm just gonna kill you first to get you out of the way, before you decide to do something stupid. If I'm on the other side, if I'm facing off against you, but
Before you
if you're
decide to jump into a pike wall.
yeah, but if you're on my line, I've already made a judgment about you as a person, and it is negative.
You will be moved down the line until you are in a position where we deem you are not likely to cause a deficiency in our tactical cohesion.
Um,
We've
I
done that to
don't.
people.
I was gonna say I don't think I've ever blue on blued a longsword fighter, but that's just because none of them have been dumb enough to stand in front of me. And
Yeah, no,
most
we,
of the
we, we
people,
never killed them. Like I said, we just send them away.
no, but I have killed two stick fighters and I have killed sword and shield fighters on my team.
Well, because they think they belong in front of you and they're
Yeah,
incorrect.
well, don't get in the firing lane. It's easy, but yeah, if you have a long sword in a battle game and you get on the line, I think you're an idiot. Full stop. Whatever crack you're drinking, whatever crack you're smoking, um, that makes you think that you know your 40 to 60 inch weapon is going to do a single goddamn thing on the battle line.
When we're
Um,
over here mounting like 120-inch weapons in that same engagement zone
yeah, don't. Exception. Um, in a gate. In a gate is where long swords shine.
in a kill pocket,
Nope,
or
nope.
for breaching,
Breaking
yeah.
breaking the kill pocket. As a response squad to a kill pocket, they're pretty useful. But at breach as a breaching team, if you have armor and a long sword, I love you. If you
Hey,
have armor and a long sword, I love you. I need you in this.
the shoulder shield helps.
Uh, to be honest, it's such a shit show. It's such a shit
You're
show.
getting beat down either way.
You
It
need
might.
you need you need about 101 longsword guys and shield people, um, because it's just a shit show. If you've ever taken a gate in any sort of battle game, it's a shit show. Um, but the ability of good longsword fighters to throw fast, close range, hard shots, that's a game winner. That's a game winner. So yes, by all means, that's where those tourney sticks are going to make their money.
It's the one place where you're going to be close in enough that it's useful. Um, and because you really can't bring like an 8-foot glaive to bear in a gate in a meaningful way.
You can't. Um,
And that's
if
normally going to be your main competition for that role is the 8-foot glaive. Why would you bring a 4-foot sword when an 8-foot glaive exists? Well, because sometimes you're going to be in a 6-foot by 6-foot room,
yeah,
and you got
and
to fight in there.
if you can swing by rotating your hips and moving the tip of your weapon 8 inches and still get a shield breaking shot on that, you're gonna make money. Like that's when you go to work. Um, so yeah, that I when I see a longsword in that situation, when I have to take a gate, I fucking love you. Most of the other time, as long as you know what the weapon is supposed to do and play to those strengths, yeah, you're fine. You're chill. Just just another soldier. So that's single swords. This is where we're gonna get ourselves in trouble.
Two stick is going to be
Uh,
long. I'm going to have my subscriber count's going to go through the roof just so people know what to hate me for this week. And this week is going to be our opinions on two
our
stick.
opinion on two sticks. So, we want to start mean or we want to start nice?
You know what? Let's start with dagger and sword, because I think we can be nice about that. Because
Okay, okay. So we broadly divided these into two sets. So matched, where you have two of the same thing, and paired, where you have two complementary weapons, but that aren't the same. So that paired might be dagger and sword, a downstick or a madu and a sword, or a spear and a sword, which is actually my personal favorite flavor of two stick. Spear and sword is a heap of fun. So yeah, let's talk about dagger and sword. I've never seen someone use dagger and sword in a battle game, so I don't know what I would think about them.
I've done it, um, but seldom, and normally it's just because I happen to be carrying a sword and dagger. Mostly when I'm fighting sword and dagger in a battle game, it's because I'm actually an archer, and it's easier for me to carry a dagger than a shield. So
Okay.
if I'm out of arrows, or if I'm forced to abandon my bow for whatever reason, or if they just desperately need another body in the clinch, I can toss the bow aside, and I'm I'm decent with sword and dagger in other contexts, so I can apply it well enough in a battle game. It's something I've done. Again, it comes up a good bit at Leeds. I think I've done it a bit at EMR. I fought at so many different places, but those are just the two we spend the most time fighting at recently. So,
Yeah, and
but
they're both the same kind of terrain, just heavily forested or close in
right.
urban combat. So that makes sense.
But other than that, you're right. It's not common, and most of the time when you see it, it's someone who's very strongly sticking to a concept or a specific character or cultural loadout. That's kind of the only time you tend to see dagger and sword in a battle game.
Yeah, I just can't remember seeing it, but I believe you. I just don't remember ever seeing it in a LARP. If you're using dagger and sword, I fucking love you because it's so stylish. Um, yeah, no, I just think it's cool as shit.
Well,
Um,
it can also be super useful in a campaign LARP setting, and a lot of this will depend on the level of weapon manipulation that's allowed. Um, Either way, it's going to be a solid setup. And I don't always agree with the school of thought that the dagger is to block and the sword is to attack. I often find myself more frequently using the longer reach of the. I'm normally fighting with a saber or a rapier. I use the reach of the longer weapon to take control of the other weapon and move it out of the way, and then do a passing step for a strike on the arm with the dagger because I can control them from further out with the rapier. If it's a game that really, really, really doesn't like you to push the other guy's weapon, well, then I fall back on most. It's at that point, it's almost a single sword fight with the knife for backup in case they do something squirrely and try to step too close.
yeah. Um, I'll be honest. I've only ever done sword and dagger in the case of SCA rapier. Um, and in that case, the thing is, even then, my rapier game is strong and way stronger than my dagger game. So my primary offensive tool was the rapier, and the dagger was just attacks of opportunity and the occasional parry. Um, but yeah, that everything you said tracked with what I've experienced.
Just
Um,
the ability. Um, the other thing is, sure, I could use two long swords, but I like having the dagger a little bit better in a campaign LARP because they like it more if you're stylish. And if I had two long swords, it would basically just be blender time, and there's not much I can do to throw some pizzazz onto that. But with the long and the short, the short, the dagger lets me cycle a lot of shots inside, if that makes sense. I can play the interior line a bit more with the offhand weapon, which gives me a few more shot, well, a lot more shot options, honestly, and the ability to pass control of the other weapon from a parry to one weapon or the other. So like, if someone swings, I can catch it on the long weapon, peel it off with the short, and throw a return cut with the long, and that can have a nice
oh,
elegant flow to it.
it's a beautiful set of moves when you pull it off.
Hmm.
I know exactly what you're talking about because it's the you know fucking Kali and Eskrima
Yep.
adore it. That is like 80% of Filipino stick fighting. Catch weapon, pass weapon, swing. um, but it looks really good.
Got to get those redondos and molines in.
Yeah. Um, the other thing actually I would have to say for this style is having a dagger is super fucking useful. Just like having something you get out and gig someone with very quickly, reliably, at very close range is so useful. It's so nice.
This thought passed through my head so many times when we were discussing a single arming sword because theoretically, I've had a single arming sword, but I hardly ever fight single arming sword because I never don't have a dagger.
Mm, that's fair. I mean, I don't even use a dagger, but I'm just thinking of like how often I ended up using my short axes,
Hmm.
like in close range as melee weapons because they're 18 inches long, and they can pop out of my belt in an instant, and I'm ready to rock and roll.
Well,
Um,
um, like a Dead Legends, for instance, which is where I do most of my um, long and short fighting lately, and by lately I mean like a year ago. Um, I more than once I would check beforehand, like before anything kicked off, to make sure that the person was okay with physical role playing or grappling. And if they said yes, then as soon as anyone made any kind of hostile move, I would treat them to the Tula drill, which was basically just my knife coming out of my belt and me crossing the gap between us so fast they didn't have time to get their pistol clear. So someone would do something that sort of indicated the fight was about to happen. Hands would be moving, but by the time their hand was on the pistol, my hand was already on their elbow and my knife was already out and on them. So like having a knife, great, always
Having a
have a
knife is
knife.
super super fucking key. You should just have a knife, but most people don't. Most people do not. Most people carry their and we could this is a whole nother topic. But most people are so bad at backup weapons, it's embarrassing. But
Well,
anyway,
part of that
so
is a ring belt doesn't really lend itself well to easy deployment, and a lot of LARP scabbards are kind of rubbish.
well, like I said, that's another episode because
Another
this
episode entirely. Let's talk about
we we
downstick.
we will we will go off on that for a good hour and a half. So this is something that is pretty much the opposite of sword and dagger. You do not see downstick or madu. And in case you don't know what those terms are, I'm talking about a longish, meaning probably 4 foot and up, but no more than 6 foot, um, spear or stabbing device that is held in the offhand, with the point of it sticking downwards, and it acts as a parrying device and a thrusting implement. Um, so downstick and sword, and it is something you do not see in LARP. It doesn't exist, primarily probably because most LARP weapons in the U.S. are not set up to thrust, and thrusting is the whole point of this.
I think I did it a little bit at the first Damarung. That was before I found out you weren't supposed to stab, and people had been stabbing at me all day anyways. That was the time when I had one of my when I
But
had my lance before we had the LARP spears. So my lance
Dameron
is safe to fight.
Dameron doesn't count because Dameron plays by plays by a different set of rules. Where if both people agree that thrusts are okay, thrusts are okay.
Right, and any
Um,
other campaign LARP I've been in, you're right. I've not seen
you're not supposed to
downstick in the
thrust.
sword. Yeah,
Yeah. honestly, honestly, if you use it in a battle game, I'm gonna be wondering, why you're using your tournament loadout on a field.
the
If it's
Madu, like the downstick, because what I've actually seen some people do in lieu of using an actual Madu is they get a quarter staff and they use a buckler and they just kind of hold them both in one hand. But
you
it,
see, that's the version I've been seeing a lot. You have a long sword held downward, and you've got a buckler strapped to your hand,
yeah,
and that's really what I'm talking about. And um,
it's very tourney specific. You're right. I don't see it on the field much. I see it plenty in tournaments that I've observed. But
yeah, I mean, if I'm seeing it on the field, my thought is you better be as good as you think you are. You better be as good as you think you are, because if you're using that on the field, you think you're real good. You're probably not, but but you think you're real good. So you know you could skirmish with it, I suppose.
right,
Um,
but anything you could do with a downstick and sword, you could probably do better by not trying to be the best of all worlds and either grabbing yourself a longsword and using it properly, or using a real shield.
yeah, yeah, I would completely agree with that. You go with the shield or you go with the longsword. You don't try and have this weird this weird compromise that, especially in most battle games, won't do jack shit against someone in armor.
Hmm. You've given up. You're using a weapon designed to break armor and shields as a parrying device, and it's such a waste of potential.
Yeah. So
A parrying device that you might get a stab on the kneecap with, but like since you can't really stab to the foot in most battle games, that well, not in any of them that I know of.
I
Uh,
don't know any of them either that you can stab with the foot.
yeah, so I mean,
I mean, you're gonna chump someone to the hip a bunch of times. Like every once in a while, you'll chump someone to the hip.
yeah, someone's gonna come at you too open with their center grip 22-inch punch, and you're gonna gig them in that happy
Yeah.
triangle.
But yeah, so if I see you with that in a battle game, I'm gonna ask you why you're in your tournament loadout, not your field loadout. Moving on, because that's about it. Um, honest to God, I don't know. I don't know anyone other than us who fights spear and sword.
It's because no one other than us fights spear and sword, right?
um, fighting spear and sword is awesome, and you should do it. I think people who fight spear and sword are awesome because it's only me and Tycho, and we're great. um, and um, yeah,
You know what's
you
even
know
more us specific about spear and sword?
what's that?
We almost always have the sword in a hanging guard.
100%, 100%. Yeah, a sword is always in a hanging guard. So spear and sword is a weird. It's a weird ass. It's a weird ass form. I suppose if someone else brought spear and sword to a line fight, I would laugh at them and ask what the fuck they're doing because what the fuck are you doing? Because it's a fucking needles. It's a fucking joke form that you're just doing for funsies.
Well,
It
I
is
heard you
not a.
guys talk. I heard someone talk about it on this podcast I listened to, and it sounded super cool. So I wanted to try it out, man.
um, I
No,
mean, it's literally the style I developed in the SCA because I didn't like fighting strap shield in the SCA. That's why I started doing it. Um, and it's a hoot, but it's a tournament. It's a tournament style. So I think it just ended up on the list because I was thinking of all the weapon styles I know.
the two stick category is the one with the longest list.
Okay, so let's move on from there. So spear and sword, the resolution is we don't see it. We only see each other do this.
Yeah,
So that's can't really give you an accurate read on
hardly
that.
bears comment.
Yeah.
So now we get to the part of two stick where we make ourselves a bit unpopular.
Yeah. Um.
If you're using matched short weapons, matched daggers, matched hatchets, you're not as fast as you think you are 90% of the time.
And
Um,
if you are, you can't actually maul someone like a grizzly bear in most of the in pretty much every game you play. And that's the thing. To use matched shorties well, you need to maul someone like a grizzly bear.
and I get it because I do it. And sometimes I'll pull out two weapons because there's that little switch in your brain that says, I can be more agile with this than if I use another weapon, but it's wrong. It's incorrect most of the time. There's a couple of instances where I've pulled out a pair of shorts where I do believe it was tactically the better choice, mostly when I'm clearing buildings. My primary weapon in Dead Legends is like a 36, I think it's like a 42-inch rapier.
It's a 40 or 42 inch
Yeah,
rapier.
it's a long sword. So like I've gone into buildings with a hatchet and knife before because I don't want to try to fight inside a building with a 42-inch rapier. It's just probably not the best option for that fight. Um, but for the most, and we have seen people who could pull it off. We've seen people who were able to use a pair of short weapons and they would go up, kind of drum roll you in the back for a little bit, and then run away faster than it was worth chasing them.
I
I've
actually no. I'm gonna actually say in a battle game context, if you do not give a single shit about your own safety or your own long term health, Anthony Allegre from New York, from Carthage, I'm talking about you. You are crazy. You are awesome. I love watching you fight. This is a dude who has two little 18-inch or 24-inch daggers. He's a little dude. Like he's probably below 5'6" if I had to guess. He's just small, and he will just throw himself at a line of people and just cut the shit out of their ankles and calves, and he'll crawl along the dirt to do it. Um, and it shouldn't work, but it does. And God bless you, you little psychopath. But he makes two shorties work. He's only going to have another few years before his knees decide, fuck you. Um, but for the moment, he's making it work. um, he is also completely, you know, completely just berserker bravery. Um, one of the most aggressive fighters I've ever seen, and he has a really good sense of field position because he does this. He goes for these dives when it's going to matter. So good field position and timing. Because you know, dealing with a ball of stabbing and aggression that doesn't care about how much it's hurting itself as it crawls across the ground is really a disconcerting experience. I will say that. Dude, you're fucking awesome. I love it. I'm not that brave anymore. I'm not that reckless anymore.
My joints have never been that good.
So yeah, so unless you're willing to just say, well, fuck it, it's only paint, two shorties is not going to work out for you so much.
Yeah, the closest I've ever come in a battle game to two shorties is those butterfly swords, and I really only do that at practice. I don't think I've ever brought those on a field where it mattered. Um, and I think part of the reason I've never fought with two shorties on a battle game field is because I've never bothered to carry two shorties at a time. Like
Right?
I have one sidearm and that's it. I've got so if I'm doing archery and I'm carrying like a cut and thrust and a knife, I don't need two knives to go with my cut and thrust. That's excessive.
Yeah.
I can hardly imagine a scenario where I have lost both my bow and my cut and thrust, and I'm not just leaving, like just getting out, going somewhere else, regrouping, figuring out what mistakes I made, and how to never ever do that again.
Yeah.
And in that event, a second knife is not going to help me.
It's kind of, you know, it's kind of another one of those trope weapons, except this one just doesn't work because the even if you were good at it, the rules still prevent it from working the way it should. This is like it's like using a it's like using a Dane axe in a battle game. Even if you get really, I'm really good with a Dane axe. Like I'm really good with the Dane axe. It's one of my preferred weapons in steel combat. I use it a lot in SCA. I use it in boffer fighting. It's still a suboptimal weapon. Um, like there are just mechanical limitations and rules limitations and a mindset limitation that just prevent the weapon from doing what it's designed to do. I kind of feel like two shorties is the same thing. Like two
Well,
shorties can be fucking brutal. Like Hawk and Bowie.
mm-hmm.
Hawk and Bowie is like one of the most terrifying combat styles that's ever been invented. Um,
I'll never forget that time when, on the advice of Professor Mark P. Donnelly, I choked up under the head of a tomahawk and punched a pumpkin and had to pull my arm back out of it because I had punched straight through the pumpkin with my fist just following the axe head straight in.
yeah, it's fucking brutal, but like in in a boffer context, that brutality is generally not welcome and almost always excessive to the goal of the game. So, that's not super duper helpful. So yeah, don't use two TLDR unless you're Anthony. Don't use two shorties in a battle game because you're not as cool as you think you are. You're not as fast as you think you are. You're just not as good as you think you are.
And you're gonna eat a spear.
You're
Or
gonna
an
eat
arrow.
it.
Or
or
both.
or or a glaive, where you're gonna have some sociopath with a glaive just bash through your block because they're gonna go, oh, they have nowhere near the leverage to stop me. Fuck you.
Yeah, you can't really deflect when
Okay,
you're using two
I might
shorties.
or might not have thought those exact words. No, no, it gets ugly. Okay, so now the good one. Matched arming swords. I'll be honest, if you're using this in a campaign LARP, this is in most campaign LARPs, this is the optimal combat build.
Mm.
I
You,
can't really hold it against you for playing to the rules.
you've got the reach of the guy with one arming sword, but you can hit twice as often, which in games where you do have to hit people a lot, I mean, people are going to laugh at me for using the term DPS, but it's a real thing in a campaign LARP.
Yeah, no,
Your ability to strike more quickly is going to allow you to put people on the ground faster. Just it is, and you can cycle shots from two arming swords more quickly than you can from one two-handed weapon. A lot more quickly,
hmm
especially if you have practice with it. Like even someone who has no idea what they're doing can probably cycle two sticks faster than I could cycle one of my like dueling long swords or my spear. And then me with two stick doing a Sinawali or a Singita or something like that, like doing some kind of Filipino stick fighting, interwoven, uh, strike chain. It's obscene how fast I can lay hits on someone.
I'm sure. I'm sure. I've never tried it. I've never specialized in it. So I don't know, but I know you could put out a huge volume of shots.
Now there's an upper limit to length for that because you start to get in your own way after a certain point.
Oh
Um,
yeah, no, you have to keep them. I'd say probably 34s,
yeah,
34s, 34s, maybe 36 if you're tall enough. Like if you're over 6 feet, 36 might be viable, but I'd feel more comfortable with 34s. Um, but yeah, so in a campaign LARP, it's you know, I never think it looks good. I don't think two matched weapons looks good. I don't think it's a good look, and I don't find it cool. I'm not impressed by it, but it it makes sense from a mechanical perspective, and it's like, well, if it makes that much sense from a mechanical perspective, meaning the rules of the game, like all of that stuff Tycho was describing, I can't get too mad of someone for doing the most on meta thing.
it just fits so poorly with so many character concepts and aesthetics. I mean, it's hard for me to think of one that it does work with.
It there because there isn't one.
Right.
I mean, well, I'll make some exceptions. If you're using two axes, it kind of
Yes.
works with the
Yep.
berserker kind of Olaf from League sort of thing.
It's just the two like mid-length swords specifically. It's super common and it just looks so meta. It doesn't look lived in, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. It because it's
Because you're not
if
the
you
Witcher, you're not carrying a different sword for different tasks. You're just carrying two swords to do the same thing because it's the most mechanically efficient way to do it in this imaginary setting. But it doesn't even come up in fictional tropes all that much.
Drizzt.
Drizzt and Lancelot from King Arthur are the only two examples that really spring to mind. Most of the time, if someone's using matched weapons in fiction, it's shorts like
Shorties, yeah, Legolas,
mm,
or
Legolas, Loki in the Marvel universe uses a pair of
yeah,
knives.
yeah. It's real common to have your badass female character use a pair of knives.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, from an aesthetics perspective, I don't like it. Gladiator. If you're playing a gladiator, like a obvious some sort of pit fighter,
Yeah,
I think two weapons works. Especially if you know how to use them stylishly from an aesthetic perspective.
although that almost demands some level of like a sword and sandals kind of setting because it's really hard to pull that look off in the kind of
Oh,
generic medieval
generic
setting.
medieval. Yeah, no, you look as like an out of place gladiator.
Mm-hmm.
You're an extra who wandered onto the wrong set. Um, I thought this was supposed to be the Russell Crowe film, guys. Um, um,
Sorry, I got lost on my way to Gladiator and wandered onto the set of Robin Hood 2010.
um, so yeah, so I don't think it looks good in most cases. Um,
And just to
maybe,
forestall,
maybe if you had really good Asian armor and used two Chinese broadswords. I mean, Zuko did that.
yeah, but I only
That
know
looked
of
I
one
liked
other.
that. That looked cool.
It did, but I only know of one other fighter who uses a Chinese broadsword. I don't
Yeah.
use one yet because I don't own one. I have a Jian, but like Chinese weapons are not super common in LARPing circles.
Oh no, they're not. But I'm saying that would be cool. Like
No,
I
it
would be
would
like
look good, and I
I
think
would be
part of
like
that
yeah,
is
I'd buy that.
yeah, part of that I think is because we have things like Dynasty Warriors, Romance of the Three Kingdoms. Like there's a lot of and also a lot of wuxia movies. So we have a lot of there's a lot more cultural depictions of someone using two longer weapons in Chinese cultural portrayals than there is in Western medieval uh, historical or fantasy settings.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Um,
So I
but
think
yeah,
that's why it looks good on Zuko and not so good on that guy there who's wearing chainmail and a kettle helm and who just inexplicably has a pair of 14th century arming swords instead of you know something that would make sense.
if you're, I will say this: if you're gonna do it, pick a sword with an uncomplicated hilt.
Make
Viking swords look way better than arming swords. If
paired
you must.
paired gladius looks pretty good too. I'll say.
Oh, that's the gladiator look. So
Right.
yeah, yeah, paired gladius, but it's the same type of simple, small, and it's this like a gladius, a Viking sword, and a Chinese saber all have a very similar guard.
I have those two short, heavy scimitars that I used at Exile for a while, and those pair pretty nicely.
Aesthetically or functionality.
Both, I think. I think I brought them out to Damrung as well. It's just harder to countenance them in that setting, so I tend to use the long saxes instead.
Yeah, but yeah, so like there's a few limited cases where it looks pretty good, but for the most part, I don't like the aesthetics the way most people do it. Okay, now comes the big one. So, two stick in a battle game. Just that defeated sigh
Well, the first
actually
question is
is
how much
completely.
armor are you wearing, and are you playing Hearthlight? Because if you're wearing enough armor and you're playing Hearthlight, you can get away with a little bit more. Because goodness, are you going to get chumped by arrows in just about any other game if you're even remotely dangerous?
So my problem with it is this: there is almost nothing that two stick does that sword and shield or longsword don't do better.
I would agree with
Like
that.
that's my problem with it. Like, don't get me wrong, about 5% of the people who fight two stick are utter demons
Mhm.
who will just in a one-on-one or even a two-on-one situation will just kick the living shit out of people. Um, the other 19 are a bunch of chumps. They're arrow catchers.
And if you're in a game where armor won't stop the first arrow shot, then yeah, you got one life to live there, and
Yeah,
it's gonna end with a piece of pointy wood sticking from your chest, either a spear or an arrow. Because as much as people talk about how they can just beat the spear aside and run up on the guy with the spear, it's conceptually super easy. But the spear's got a lot more leverage than you do, and he's usually not alone. And if it's anyone we've ever trained, which is a decent number of the spear fighters on the East Coast that come to our events, anyways, they've either trained with us or fought against us and learned from it. They're gonna have a backup weapon. So as soon as you start those moves of aha, see, I'm putting your spear aside, now I'm running up where I can easily kill you. Well, that knife is already coming into play.
yeah.
Um,
I mean, I mean, the fundamental problem is that first off, it's way harder to catch the first blow than most people think, and especially in a battle game where you have to catch the first blow and arrest enough of momentum for it not to count as a valid hit.
Right, you have to catch it well enough that it really physically stops before it hits you.
Yeah, like that's way harder than most people think it is. And then just you've gotta you've gotta dedicate the portion, your half your offense at least, maybe more, because it's way harder to pin a weapon or to control a weapon with a sword than it is to control a weapon with a shield. So you have to tie up a bunch of your offensive power in order to close the gap. Um, so yeah, so it's just like I said, it's there's nothing that a two stick can do that sword and shield can't do just as well, if not better.
Yeah, that kind of wraps up our feelings on Battle Game Two Stick.
Yeah, like for the most part, you get it's either get a shield or get a longer sword. Like
Because I've even
it's
had people outright say like, "Oh yeah, I parry with my left hand and I attack with my right," and I think, well, then use a shield.
yeah,
It makes the parrying so much more reliable. Um, you, I mean, on the off chance that you get a left-handed shot that you're able to take without being immediately retaliated on, you could have made that same shot right-handed while using a shield and being much safer from said retaliation, which is gonna happen.
yeah. Um, so yeah, I mean, I'm usually asking why are you not using a more effective loadout? Is what I think.
Now that's on the battlefield, because again, like I said, I've used the butterfly sabers in practice, and that was kind of fun.
Oh, I
Um,
mean, they could be absolutely fun, but just in terms of pure efficacy,
right, from a
and
viability standpoint, I like I said, I would not take those on the field.
again,
Um,
we're not talking tournaments. And I actually will say, in defense of two stick in a skirmish that doesn't have any missile weapons, if you're decent with it, can be really irritating.
like if it's raining,
Oh, just it's a 5-person skirmish, five on five skirmish, and there's a good chance that a 5-on-5 skirmish won't have missile weapons in it.
it's true.
In that case, two stick has a better chance of shining. Because if you're talented enough to really choose someone up in a duel in a one-on-one, you're gonna be okay. You're gonna be okay. You're gonna do all right. So yeah, so I would say that on a bigger battlefield, use something else, because literally anything else you use is gonna be better.
Unless you're a poor college student who can't afford shields, in which case you're probably stuck with two stick.
You're probably stuck with two stick, yeah.
And I know where you're coming from. I feel that pain.
Yeah,
Not
no,
anymore, but I used to.
like if you don't have literally any other options, then hey, it's better than doing single arming sword. um, so yeah, if you literally have no other options, whatever, you do what you got to do. But if you have another choice, it's like make that other choice. Okay, so I think that's it about two sticks.
We kind of glossed over two shorts in a campaign setting, but I think we touched on it.
I mean, everything we said about two shorts in a combat game applies even more in a campaign setting.
Maybe even
Because
a
if
little
you
more so because you're even more disincentivized from getting that close and aggressive.
yeah, if you can't maul someone, yeah, if you can't maul someone with them, they're just not going to work that well.
Yeah,
Um,
and reach tends to be a lot more. Uh,
Reach matters. Yeah,
yeah,
reach matters,
reach is always a big deal.
especially if you're expected to step and grunt.
Now, I will say that two shorts I find fit a lot more character concepts than two arming swords.
Oh yeah, 100%, a hundred
Um,
percent.
there's a lot of characters, and I've played some of them where two knives look totally normal. Volkov sometimes, before I started bringing spears out, Volkov would sometimes just have two knives and a bunch of tomahawks. And that was the way it would go.
Yeah, and I mean, there's all sorts of concepts, or all sorts of characters where it works and fits, and I
You just
think it's very characterful.
you just got to feel your way around the game and see if you can find a way to do it where you're not just going to be frustrated all the time by your inability to contribute.
Yeah,
You're gonna need foot speed, like you're gonna have to get from point A to point B with a quickness. Uh, you're gonna need hand speed because, like I said, fighting in a big melee at a game where we were greatly outnumbered, I was able to make it out alive using a pair of knives, but I kind of had to overclock for a bit. And you're gonna have to do that if you're doing anything other than a 1v1 show fight, because the other guy has time. They have reach on you, almost guaranteed, and they can kind of, take their time and exploit that at their leisure. And you have to make openings and keep them from just, bombing you from orbit. And that takes a lot of energy, a lot of work. Your hands got to move fast, and you need to not gas out 30 seconds in.
yeah, I'd agree with that. I'd agree with that. Like, it is a commitment. Um,
And if it
it,
works
it
in your
is,
game, you could have a lot of fun with it.
yeah, yeah, and if it works, if it works, you'll look good. If you do all those things, you'll look really good with it.
Mhm.
I do find it does need a lot more theory. I remember when I was running the Damarung and Malleus practices before all this bullshit hits. We had a fighter who wanted to use two 24-inch swords, and teaching them how that needed to work for it to for it to be effective and for it to look good, that was a challenge. And this person had come without any sort of martial background.
I was just gonna say, with no other martial background, it is gonna be uphill.
Yeah, it's doable. They got a lot out of it, but it's very counterintuitive to what a lot of newbies especially will want to do. Just the level of aggression and the level of sustained aggression is hard for many people to it's hard for many people to unlock, to utilize in a game. Like, it's tough. I struggle to do it in campaign larps.
That was one of the first things I noticed at the first one I played that I actually liked and stuck with for more than a few sessions was that, um, in a battle game fight, I am very much a tactical cruise fighter where I'm kind of just going along, conserving energy. I reach the engagement zone, I expend the energy necessary to win the fight, and I go back to like strategic cruise where I'm only using like limited fuel, just kind of coasting along until. But that's because the engagements in a battle game are short.
Yeah,
Like I can
they're
march to
short
the
and
engagement
decisive.
zone, fight for like 30 seconds max, and now either me or that other guy and all of his friends are dead.
Yep.
I was in like 15-minute long fights where I was moving that stick most of the time at the first campaign. Like I'm like, this is different. I need more cardio. Cardio that I didn't need for battle games, I needed for the campaign LARP because I had to fight more people with more frequency for a longer period of time.
Yeah. Just the experience of Damarong and just how much of a damage sponge you could be with 8 hit points and a shield.
Hmm.
You could be a massive, massive damage sponge. Like, I sometimes felt like I was almost cheating because I had 11 hit points with a big ass shield, and it's just like, yeah, no, the thing is, I'm a good shield person. Like, I'm a very, very proficient shield fighter. Um, so I could just move this thing around and just catch everything, and whatever doesn't get through starts to like tink away at this massive pile of hit points I have, and it's just like, I promise I'm not cheating, guys. I really am this durable.
I'm just really, really good at not letting you hit me.
Yeah. Um,
But I think one of the things that contributes to a newbie having an issue with that is the fact that in fiction, whenever you do see one of those two short, stabby types, their fighting is depicted as basically effortless.
yeah. And in almost every movie. I mean, that's a general rule that armor is always depicted as way less effective than it actually is
Right.
because it's almost unbelievable. Metal armor is like mail. Mail is fucking incredible. Um, plate is almost unimaginable in terms of the amount of physical abuse you could take in plate.
The,
But you know,
the dumb armor tricks that we do for bystanders.
stupid armor tricks, yeah. But just watching, someone shove a short sword through a breastplate and that happening in like every medieval themed fantasy fantasy movie. It just kind of gives this really false impression of what the fuck happens in real life. And overcoming that's not the way it's going to go is a challenge for a lot of people.
So that was single sword, two stick. Actually, that's as far as we
That's
got.
it. That's as far as we got.
This might be like 3 episodes that we end up pulling out of this.
I have a feeling the next set is going to go pretty quick, but
That's true because two stick was a big category. Two stick is a very big
two
category.
stick was like a bunch of categories put together. But yeah, so coming up next time, we're going to talk about pole arms, long and short, spears, and I could give you a preview of the answer of spears. If you bring a spear onto the field, I take you seriously. Um,
Spears are the weapons of people who win wars.
yeah. Weird shit, which has a subcategory of weeb shit. Um, and so if you didn't already don't like us because of the shit we talked on Tuesday, listen in when we talk about weeb shit because we're gonna that'll be some shit. Bows and the old reliable sword and shield.
The second
So
best weapon to the spear.
so that will be next time.
I think we probably get through all those. Those are a
I
lot more
think so. Yeah.
straightforward.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm Tycho. This is Urdok. Our background today is from Siren from Pass of the Crown Bear several years ago. And these have been fighting words, probably more literally in this case than in any other episode. We'll see you
Oh,
next time.
I don't think that's the case. I think we could do better than that for just instigating.
Oh, I mean,
Um,
we can, but we haven't yet.
true. Fair.
We
All
will,
right.
though. Good night.
See you. See you next time, everybody.